I never expected to be humiliated at my own sister's engagement party. The warm glow of the crystal chandeliers, the smiles practiced to perfection like a Hollywood script, and Sienna's voice ringing out with pride as she laughed and told everyone I was just a low-level paper pusher at the courthouse. The crowd gave a polite, condescending chuckle. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded sharp, like metal piercing skin. My chest tightened with a familiar burning sensation. But I kept quiet, wearing the same faint, empty smile I'd worn for years. My family loved labels. Not the designer ones on Sienna's handbags, but labels for people's short, easy-to-digest tags they could use at cocktail parties. Sienna was always the sun, the one who made every room revolve around her ambitious, charismatic, and brilliant. And me? I was Clara, the reliable little sister who did boring paperwork at the county court. That label followed me to every Thanksgiving table and every Christmas dinner. "Still doing admin work?" they'd ask, with a pitying smile that barely hid their contempt. I would just nod. What they didn't see was how carefully I had learned to be invisible. It wasn't because I was ashamed. It was because I realized early on that my success would make them uncomfortable, especially Sienna. She couldn't stand sharing the spotlight. So, I dulled my own edges and shrank into the shadow they expected of me just to keep a fake peace. I turned myself into a lesser version of myself so they could feel great. But tonight, amidst the scent of expensive orchids and the thick layer of lies, that glass cage was starting to crack. A question from Marcus, my sister's perfect fiancé, was about to tear off the mask I had spent 3 years building. Sienna's engagement party was a lavish but soulless display, designed more to show off wealth than to celebrate love. Rows of lanterns hung across the Westchester estate like artificial stars, lighting up a stage where everything was fake. I arrived early, not to enjoy myself, but to play the ghost role my family assigned me, cleaning up the mess before it even started. My mother handed me a stack of napkins and pointed toward the bar without even looking at me. "Make sure it's clean, Clara," she ordered, her voice cold and dry. I quietly wiped water spots off the marble countertops and picked up crumbs, becoming the invisible steel frame holding this sandcastle together. Sienna arrived like a queen stepping out of a black limousine. The diamond on her finger caught the light, shining with a sharpness that seemed to challenge the darkness itself. The crowd swarmed her immediately, tossing empty compliments into the air like smoke. Marcus walked right behind her, a man of power and silence. He wasn't flashy like Sienna, but his eyes were as sharp as a scalpel, observing everything with terrifying calm. When Sienna pulled me over to introduce me to her high society friends, I felt the contempt hidden behind her calculated hug. "Everyone, this is Clara, my sister. She does admin work at the county court." Sienna laughed, her voice high and mocking. "She mostly answers phones and labels files. Small jobs, but someone has to do them, right?" Giggles broke out, and eyes looked at me like I was a piece of outdated furniture. I stood there, my glass still full, watching the theater of lies. But Marcus didn't laugh. He looked me straight in the eye, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. He was trying to dig up a memory that didn't match the admin worker label Sienna had just pinned on me. Dinner was served in a room thick with the smell of fake wealth. The white porcelain plates and silver cutlery were lined up perfectly on the mahogany table, looking like weapons ready for war. Sienna sat at the center, radiant and powerful, while I was placed at the very end, the default spot for outsiders, people who were only there to make others look better. The loud chatter about million-dollar deals in Manhattan and luxury vacations in the Hamptons made the air heavy with vanity. Sienna raised her champagne glass, her sharp eyes flicking to me with a look of triumph before settling on Marcus. "To Marcus's billion-dollar deals," she began, her voice echoing with pride. "And also, thanks to Clara for being here. Without the people in the background keeping the paperwork organized and answering those annoying calls, how would big players like us have the time to change the world?" A wave of laughter followed. My father nodded in approval, and my mother was busy adjusting her expensive pearls. No one noticed the public humiliation being poured over me. I looked down at my hands resting on my lap. They were still not shaking at all. The anger inside me was no longer a fire. It had hardened into a block of ice, sharp, cold and solid. Marcus wasn't laughing. He set his glass down, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. As a top Wall Street lawyer, Marcus had spent his career reading people through the smallest gestures. He watched how I held my glass, how I kept my back straight with the posture of someone who held the power of life and death, and the terrifying calm in my eyes traits that never belonged to a low-level clerk. The atmosphere suddenly shifted when Marcus turned toward me, completely breaking the script Sienna had worked so hard to write. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice deep and commanding. "Clara, what exactly do you do at the county court? I have a feeling we've met before, in a very different place, somewhere people hold their breath when you walk in." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. The silence wasn't out of politeness. It was because Marcus's question wasn't in Sienna's script. It hung in the air, raw and dangerous, like a live wire about to explode. I felt the weight of dozens of eyes on me, the pressure of years of suppressed truth pushing against my shoulders. I didn't rush to answer. I looked down at my hands, my thumb tracing the rim of the cold glass. The oak table felt solid beneath me, a sharp contrast to the shaky, fake reality around us. I could hear the crickets in the Westchester garden and the hum of the air conditioner, and I could feel my own heart beating slower, more decisively. In that pause, 1,000 memories flooded back. I remembered the long nights in my lonely apartment, surrounded by thick law books and case files, where I had to weigh every detail to decide people's fates. I remembered the feeling of having to shrink myself every time I walked through my parents' door, becoming a dull ghost so I wouldn't outshine Sienna's narcissism. I had mistaken silence for kindness, a sacrifice to keep family peace. But right now, I realized that was soul suicide. Sienna was looking at me, her smile becoming twisted and tense. My father froze as he went to raise his glass, and my mother stared at her plate as if it held a horrible secret. Marcus remained patient, his gaze without mockery, only a growing recognition. I straightened my back and set my glass down. The light clack was as sharp as a gavel hitting a bench. I looked Marcus dead in the eye, my voice cold and cutting. "Judge, I don't answer phones, Marcus. I'm the one who makes the final ruling." The word "judge" didn't come out with a boast. It was quiet but carried the weight of a death sentence for the fake atmosphere. The air in the room seemed to thicken. Every whisper died out, and even the light from the chandeliers seemed to tremble. My mother dropped her silver fork onto her porcelain plate with a loud clang that shattered the eerie silence. My father sat frozen, his eyes wide with horror as if he were seeing a stranger in the body of the daughter he had always looked down on. Marcus was the first to break the freeze. He didn't laugh, and he didn't doubt me. He leaned back in his chair, looking at me with a level of respect and shock I had never seen anyone in this family give me. "Judge Clara Vance." He repeated my full name, something Sienna hadn't even bothered to put on the invitations. Manhattan Supreme Court. I remember now. The $2 billion Thorne merger case last year. If you were the presiding judge. I stood before your bench more than 10 times. But I never connected the powerful woman in the black robe to the admin sister Sienna always talked about. Sienna let out a laugh, a high-pitched, dry sound full of pure panic. "That's ridiculous. Marcus, are you crazy? She's just a clerk. She answers the phones." She turned to me, her face red with rage and humiliation. "What kind of game are you playing? You want to embarrass me on my engagement night? So you made up this whole story, didn't you?" I didn't look at her. I looked straight at my parents, who were still holding their breath. "It's been 3 years, I said, my voice ruthlessly calm. "I've been a judge for 3 years. I never lied and said I was a clerk. It's just that every time I tried to talk about my career, you all looked away or interrupted me to talk about Sienna. You liked this small version of me because it made you feel safe." Sienna stared at me, her eyes usually full of self-importance now, bloodshot with humiliation. She couldn't accept that the light bulb she looked down on was actually the real sun. "You planned this, didn't you?" Sienna hissed, her voice sounding like a cobra about to strike. "You waited until today, until I was at my happiest, to throw this in everyone's face? You've always been jealous of me, Clara. You couldn't stand me being the center of attention." She turned to Marcus, hoping to find an ally to protect her warped world. "Marcus, "Don't listen to her. She's trying to tear us apart." But Marcus wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on me, filled with a mix of respect and regret. "Sienna, that's enough," Marcus said, his voice low but heavy, cutting her off. "The issue isn't what Clara does for a living. The issue is how you've spoken about your own sister for the past year. You called her incompetent, a burden, someone I shouldn't bother getting to know. I can't believe I let you lead my perception of a woman that the entire New York legal community respects." The collapse wasn't a loud explosion. It was like an iceberg quietly cracking in the middle of the ocean. The entire aura Sienna had built around herself, the wealth, the status, the perfect husband, began to crumble. The guests, who had just been flattering her, were now looking at her with judgment and mockery. "This is my night!" Sienna screamed. But this time her voice shook with fear rather than anger. She realized the center of the universe had shifted. And for the first time in her life, Sienna saw herself for who she really was. A petty bully standing before a judge who knew no mercy. The taste of betrayal in the room was now thicker and more bitter than the expensive foie gras cooling on the plates. The dinner table, meant to celebrate Sienna's success, had become an unofficial witness stand where every look carried the weight of an indictment. My mother, a woman who prided herself on controlling every social situation, suddenly looked 10 years older. She reached out a trembling hand to touch me, but stopped mid-air, as if touching me now would burn her with the truth. "Clara, why?" she whispered. "Why did you hide something this big from us? We're family." I looked at her, my eyes as cold as a frozen lake in Central Park. "I didn't hide it, Mom," I replied, each word dropping like a stone. "I tried to tell you at Thanksgiving last year, but you were too busy yelling at me for not helping Sienna book her hair appointment. I tried to tell you on Dad's birthday, but he was too busy talking about Sienna's new Hermes bag. You weren't tricked. You just didn't care to look. Because an admin daughter was easier to control and made a better backdrop for Sienna than a Supreme Court judge." My father cleared his throat, trying to find some lost authority, but his shoulders slumped under my gaze. He realized he had spent years insulting the person who held the very power he craved in his own business dealings. "We only wanted what was best for you, Clara," he mumbled weakly. I gave a faint smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, you only wanted what was best for your ego. You wanted one daughter to show off at the golf course, and one daughter to be a servant." Tonight, that script burned to ashes. Marcus stood up slowly, every movement carrying the decisiveness of a lawyer who had just found the evidence to flip a case. He looked at Sienna, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, as if she were a stranger, a stain on a $1 million contract. "Sienna," his voice was low but clear in the silence of the dying party. "I always wondered why you found every excuse to keep me from meeting your family for over a year. Now it's obvious. You weren't afraid they would embarrass you. You were afraid I'd see the truth about Clara." Sienna rushed over, grabbing Marcus's arm, her nails digging into his expensive suit jacket like a drowning person clutching a raft. "Marcus, you can't do this to me." "This is just a small misunderstanding, Clara. She's always been jealous. She's acting just to ruin our happiness," she cried. But those weren't tears of regret. They were the panic of someone who had just lost their ultimate power move. Marcus coldly brushed her hand away without hesitation. "A Supreme Court judge doesn't need to act to prove her worth, Sienna. She is the worth. But you lied to me about your own flesh and blood. You smeared a woman I admired just to make yourself look superior. I got engaged to the woman I thought you were, not this cowardly, hateful bully." He turned to me and gave a slight, respectful nod, a gesture of professional equality. "I apologize, Judge Vance. I am sorry I was an unwitting part of this insult." Marcus turned and walked away, leaving Sienna to collapse among the white flowers and fading fairy lights. The next morning, I woke up in my Upper East Side apartment to a strange silence. There was no anxiety, no running scripts in my head on how to cope, only sunlight streaming through the curtains and the steady hum of New York City outside. I made myself a double espresso. Its bitterness was clean and honest, unlike the sweet lies of Westchester. My phone on the table wouldn't stop vibrating. Awkward apology texts, missed calls from relatives who hadn't looked at me in 3 years, all suddenly wanting to reconnect, now that they realized I held real power. My parents left 2 voicemails full of confusion and forced explanations. I didn't listen to any of them. My silence now wasn't a punishment. It was a release. I no longer owed them a smaller version of myself. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. It was Marcus. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, like he'd spent the night reevaluating his entire life. We sat across from each other as our coffee grew cold. Marcus didn't make excuses for Sienna, and he didn't try to save anything. "I can't unsee it now," he said, his voice raspy. "The way she insulted you, the way everyone acted like it was normal, it changed everything." I nodded, needing no further explanation. The world of narcissists relies on the silence of those around them, and once that silence is broken, the whole structure falls apart. When Marcus left, the apartment felt lighter. Truth doesn't always bring a grand victory with trumpets, but it always brings clarity. I took a deep breath, feeling a 1,000-pound weight finally lift off my shoulders. I was no longer the pity case sister in the shadows. I was Clara Vance, and for the first time in years, I felt completely free. A week after the storm in Westchester, Sienna showed up at my door unannounced. No sharp makeup, no designer clothes, no usual arrogance. She looked thin and fragile in an old sweater, her fake brilliance stripped away to reveal a soul full of cracks. We didn't hug, and there were no dramatic apologies. We just stood in my sun-drenched living room with a canyon of years of hurt between us. "I was always afraid," Sienna said, her voice cracking. "Afraid of being ordinary, afraid of being overshadowed by you. I turned you into a ghost so I could feel like I was shining." I looked at her and felt a cold kind of pity. Jealousy is a poison you drink yourself while hoping the other person dies. "I was never your competition, Sienna," I replied, calm but firm. "You created a battlefield that didn't exist and made yourself the loser." She nodded slowly, actually listening for the first time without interrupting. Her marriage to Marcus was officially canceled, and her social standing in New York had vanished like mist. But maybe, from the ruins of her lies, she could finally start learning how to be a real person. I used to think silence was being kind, a way to keep the family together. I was wrong. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It only teaches people how to shrink you until you disappear. Never owe anyone a lesser version of yourself just to make them comfortable. If you're hiding in the dark so someone else can shine, remember that you deserve to be seen in all your brilliance. Share your story in the comments if you've ever been looked down on by your family. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice and pride. You aren't alone, and you aren't invisible anymore.